If vocation can be described as a calling, then, and each of you has a vocation of being a student, then someone or something is calling, and you are the ones being called. Logical? Makes sense so far? Yeah, in other words, you are the object of that verb, to be called. If someone calls you, you're being called, and someone else is doing the calling. Okay. The question is, where does the call come from? Where does the vocation come from? Now, if it's a strong feeling of suitability, where does that come from? You answer, not me. It's not a rhetorical question now. If we were to define it as a strong feeling of suitability, where does that strong feeling come from?
That comes from inside yourself.
From yourself, yeah. It's generated something you yourself feel. Whereas in that historic definition in terms of a particular vocation of being a calling of a priest or nun, where does the calling come from? From God. So how we define calling, how we define vocation is really important. And when you consider your vocation as a student, because we're NSA, just by entitling this first talk this way, I'm suggesting to you, your time at New St. Andrews College, undergoing a AA or BA degree, is a vocation. It is a calling. It is something that you are called to do. It is your vocation. Obviously, and so how you define it is important. It's always interesting to look in different languages and different cultures, how they would translate that term. Now, Hebrew is my particular area of interest. And there's no sense of calling in how you would translate vocation into Hebrew. The two words have the meaning of either something that is designated or sent or mission. So there's no voice involved etymologically in the Hebraic context. It has more of the idea of an obligation that is being given. Not quite a command, but almost. When you're designated to do something, when you have been sent to do something. You've been given a mission to do something. There is an obligation that has been placed on you. So there's no idea of a voice or a calling, but the same principle is true. Someone or something outside of yourself is giving you something to do. And that is important, because if we were to limit our definition as a strong feeling of suitability, which Corbin said is something that comes from inside of yourself, if your vocation here at New St. Andrews is driven by a strong feeling of suitability, it's going to become difficult when that strong feeling disappears. And my guess is, and I think it's going to be an accurate one, that you will all experience at some point, and for different reason, an equally strong feeling of unsuitability about the task that you're given. Whether it's because you don't like Latin, or you don't like music, or standing up in front of speaking in front of the whole class is not, you feel completely unsuitable for that. And your sense of vocation, your sense of here at NSA as a student is generated by a sense of suitability, then you're going to struggle at that point. But as Christians, we've been delivered from that. Or we should have been. And if we all stood up and gave our stories as to why and how we got to be here, we'd communicated it in different ways. And some of you may have been communicated as, I just feel that's the best place for me. I feel, you might be feeling uncomfortable at the moment. He's saying he's just undoing all the reasons why I came to NSA. I thought I was really suitable for this education. But ultimately, Christians, the Lord uses various different ways to get us to the point where he wants us to be. God is the subject in the calling of you to a particular task in a particular place. And you're here at this moment, in this time, and your vocation is to be a student. And so the first thing we need to realize, and the first thing you need to realize, is, in one sense, to know before whom you study. Know before whom you're fulfilling this vocation. Yes, it's your teachers, it's your parents, that's all true, but ultimately, you're a student, and you study, and you work, and you fulfill those obligations as one who acknowledges that it is God who has called you to be here. And he's used a variety of means, and some of them quite unusual, some of them quite ordinary. But God has called you to be here, and if that is the case, his purpose for you here is for your good and for your blessing and for fruitfulness. Because he's made that clear in his word. You know, he wants, as you fulfill your vocation as a student here at New St. Andrew's College, the purpose of it, to give you the image, would be, let's pick Psalm 1:3, to be that fruitful tree planted by streams of water, whose leaf doesn't wither, who gives its fruit in season. And everything he does prospers. That's the goal. God wishes that for you as a student at NSA. Now, you may feel at various times that the means he's using to get you to that point seem somewhat difficult and uncomfortable, or challenging, or beyond you. And it's at those times you go, no, I need to remember who's placed me here? Why has he placed me here? And that is important. Now, I want to unpack some principles of vocation and in the next 35, 40 minutes or so. First one's being more general, and the second one being more specific to your studies here at New St. Andrew's College. Okay. And we know the greatest commandment, if God is the person who's given you the vocation, God has called you here, and he's used a variety of means to do so. And we know from Scripture and through the teaching of the church that God has given us two great commandments, to love God and to love his neighbor. Out of that, those commands spring all other things. Everything else is commentary in one sense. We're called to love God and called to love our neighbor. And in your vocation of a student, that is, in one sense, the sum of your vocation. You've got 4 years at NSA to love God and love your neighbor. But we know that being, as we've discussed, vocation and calling has a sense of obligation to it. The greater is summoned the lesser, so to speak, to a particular task. You've been sent on a particular task. You've been given a particular task. And that obligation is to love God and to love your neighbor. And so I want to reflect a little bit, and it will become clear as we go on in relationship to your studies, on that nature of the relationship between obligation and affections. Or to put it another way, how can you command love? Surely it's a feeling that hits you now and again. Well, no. If that was the case, it can't be commanded. And people have reflected on that for generations. Okay, and it's an important thing for you to reflect on as you begin your studies here. I'm going to quote, as is my wont, a Jewish philosopher. His name is Franz Rosenzweig. He was writing in the late 19th, early 20th century. Okay, and he's reflecting on this challenge. He says, yes, of course, love cannot be commanded. No third party can command it or obtain it by force. No third party can do so. The one can. The commandment to love can only come from the mouth of the lover. Only the lover can say and does say, love me. And he really does. See, speaking about God. In his mouth, that is in God's mouth, the commandment of love is not an alien commandment. It is none other than the voice of love itself. The love of the lover has, in fact, no other word to express itself than the commandment. Everything else is no longer direct expression, but explanation. Explanation of love. He said, it seems strange that you cannot command love. I can't command you to love me. Okay? Well, I could try. It's not going to do anything, I don't think. Yeah, but it would be totally inappropriate. It says, God, who is love, only has one command. Love me. Everything else is commentary on that. Everything else is it. It is the only command that love has. So everything else written in Scripture, everything else that comes from Scripture, and in that Jewish context, he's really talking about commands, things to obey. He said everything else is really just an explanation. It's an explanation of love. What does love look like? He says, well, here you go. The rest of the Torah tells you what love looks like. And so love has obligations. And then it's not foreign to obligations. There are duties involved. There are commands to keep. Okay. And we need to understand that important aspect of, and the legal aspect in both defining and feeding the emotional or affection aspect, the relational aspect. It's not that the relational aspect is not present in the Bible, it's clearly present. God clearly says that he set his desire upon Israel. He entered into covenant with Israel. Talks about his heart being moved within him. There's language of great affection because he is love. And that affection is expressed by Israel towards God. So there is affection, there is a relational aspect to it. But we can't just take that aspect. There is this aspect of obligation and love. And we need to understand, and we're going to apply it really closely to you as a student in a minute, that those two are not in conflict with one another. It's not that one is positive and the other is negative. They're two sides of the same coin. They feed each other. Obligation and affection should not be separated. You've grown up in a society that has separated them completely. And it's reaped havoc. As one author put it, because obligation, let me back up before I do that quote. Obligation gives you things to do, tells you how to act, tells you how to live. The Bible says a lot about that. Old Testament and New Testament. Okay. And as one author put it, says, behavior over time become dispositions. observances become acts of devotion. Or to put it another way, how you behave feeds into and affects your affections and how you feel. We go, hold on, I'm going to wait till I have this strong feeling, and when I feel really good and really positive and really happy, and I love God this morning a lot, guess what? I'm going to love my neighbor this afternoon. We sort of say, this is the generator of this. And of course, when we don't have this, then it all falls apart. So as your vocation of a student, you're here for 4 years, 2 years, 4 years. That means you're studying as one who knows that his God has placed him here to study, and it's before him primarily that you do your Latin vocab, and you do your music theory, and you do your theology, and you do give your rhetoric declamations. Primarily it's before him that you do all those things. And therefore the obligations that you have as a student are ones that you do as before him. And as you do that, you will be forming dispositions and habits of devotion that will be positive. Some of you will find it very easy to love a particular subject. Some of you already do. Some of you are desperate, can't wait to get into the Latin class. Some of you say, I can't wait to get into the theology class. I love those things. I love that subject, history, whatever it may be. And there'll be other classes, don't like so much. We all know that which we enjoy, that which we give ourselves to, that which we have a natural affection for, enables us to work at it in a more thorough, more enjoyable. We give ourselves to it. Now, that's natural. The vocation of a student for you will be to give yourselves to those things where you don't have that natural affection as one that has something that God has set before you to do. And what you find is, it may not become the love of your life, but you'll come to find that that will generate an affection and a desire for it which you didn't have in the first place. It'll feed, actions and affections feed one another. So your affections as a student towards your studies need obligations. They need them. And your obligations need affections. Those two need to go together. And ultimately, behind that is a love for God and a desire to obey him. Or to put it another way, if you don't hear the loving voice of God saying, love me, which is the prime command, in the particular obligations that you are given, you are less likely to commit yourself to fulfilling those obligations. So as a vocational student, what I'm urging you to do is when those obligations are going to be manifold and they're going to be many and they're going to come quite quickly. Don't let that voice of the calling be drowned out, and see in each of those obligations, ultimately God is saying, love me in this. Love me in this. Love me in that. And as you commit yourself to loving him in those situations, you'll find that you're Not only is there a blessing to you in your relationship with God, but you find that your affections, your obligations, and your attitude towards your studies will be transformed each day. And that is the prime vocation of the student. You're called to love God and to love your neighbor. And the charge is this: go and do it. Go and do it, but hear that call to love God in all that is set before you to do. Aquinas, in the beginning of his Summa Theologica, talks about sacred doctrine, so theology being the most important subject, which I always like because I teach theology. And he said, well, what's the relationship then between theology, the queen of the sciences, and all the other subjects? You know, what has that science, mathematics, Latin, what have all those subjects got to do with theology? And he used Proverbs 9 as his sort of text. Proverbs 9 has wisdom personified, and Christ is the wisdom of God. It's a personification of Christ. Calling out in the streets and sending out her handmaidens in order to summon people to her table to feast. And Aquinas says, Christ is the wisdom of God. All sacred doctrine is about the knowledge of God. Christ is that central, the wisdom calling out, and all the handmaidens are all the other subjects of in one sense, the liberal arts subjects. The handmaidens of Christ summoning you to feast at his table. Which is another way of saying exactly the same thing that I've been saying. Hear the summons of God, hear the call of God, hear the challenge of God to love him through the whole curriculum. Not just in the theology class, through the whole curriculum. That Latin, that rhetorical trope that you need to learn, that historical fact you need to learn is a handmaiden of the Christ summoning you to the table, to feast at Christ's table and to love God. Okay, and that is the ultimate. If you're going to thrive here at NSA as a student, you're going to fulfill your vocation as a Christian student, that is the foundation for you. That is the foundation. Hear that call of God saying, love me in each particular obligation that you are given. And rejoice in it and commit yourself to it. Now let me, therefore, unpack that with a little bit more detail in relationship to the nuts and bolts of the NSA education. So, and that has to be tied to the mission of NSA, which came out in the idea of vocation and telos having an and. So the mission of New St. Andrews College is to graduate leaders who shape culture, living faithfully under the lordship of Jesus Christ. Okay, that is our mission. Everything we do is aimed towards graduating leaders who shape culture, living faithfully under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And as a faculty, we've been charged with giving a liberal arts education, studying these various subjects in a way that will fulfill that mission. And so we set about, and this is a little bit before my time, but I remember that faculty now, to list the various skills and character traits that we think and that we desire to inculcate in our students in order for them to be the sort of people who will lead, who will shape culture and live faithfully under the lordship of Jesus Christ. Okay, so there was that aspect of the education. I'm going to go through those list of skills and traits so you know what we're wanting to do. But we also are aware, and I'll come back to this later, that there is more to an education than simply life in a classroom. Okay, so there are other aspects of life at NSA which we think contribute to that and fall under the category of the vocation of a student for you. Whether that's sport, the opportunity to play rugby, volleyball, soccer, there's a rowing club, all those opportunities. It's not we haven't got a $200 million sports stadium out there, as you will no doubt know already. But that's a valuable part of the NSA education. Service opportunities, students with the relief of the oppressed, leaf raking, singing at Good Samaritans and old people's homes. That's all the service opportunities are all part of what we consider the education of New St. Andrews College. So not compulsory, but we give you those opportunities because we think those are valuable for you as a student to fulfill your vocation as a student before Christ, to produce people who will live faithfully under his lordship and lead and shape culture. And obviously we encourage church activities and participation. Dress code, that's part and parcel of it. Okay, it's not just an arbitrary imposition to make your life more difficult. Obviously, codes of conduct, social activities, all that is part and parcel of what we would consider as an NSA education. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I want to focus in now just particularly on the skills and traits. Okay? These are the sort of skills that we are looking to develop in you, and each class will have different emphases on it. So the skills of rhetoric, dialectic, perspective, observation, process, and imagination. Those are sort of skills we are looking to develop in each of the classes. Being able to communicate well in spoken word and written word. Making sure your sentences say what you want them to say and not what you think they say. Yeah. Being able to define terms, being able to divide between one opinion and the other and relate one to another and come out with an idea of what is true and what is right. Being able to understand a particular topic from different perspectives. One of the great advantages of learning a different language, suddenly the world looks different than it does in English. I remember when I first started learning Hebrew, I was at the young age of 27 when I began. And I'm sitting in I was traveling to an Israeli's house in Bristol. I was living in England at the time, in Bath, and twice a week I'd go over to Bristol to start learning Hebrew. And I remember that, it sticks in my mind very clearly. I remember he asked me a question, and I answered it, and he said, Sim lev, in Hebrew. I went, what? And he said, pay attention. And I said, well, hold on, what you just said in Hebrew doesn't translate to pay attention. It translates to put your heart into it. Okay, and then suddenly I thought, okay, so in Hebrew, they say, their way of expressing something is completely different to the way I'm used to expressing it. And suddenly I get a greater nuance into what it means to give myself to a particular topic. So perspective is really, really important. Observation. It's a necessary skill. Particularly, I would argue, and I will say a little bit more on this just briefly on Friday night at the convocation, how do you read something well? Okay, you won't hear me teach again unless you take Hebrew until you're seniors. Okay? I take senior year theology. And we talk about really the whole year as just to spoil the surprise before you get there is how do you read your Bible well? And the most striking thing is what poor readers we are. Bible particularly, but in most texts. We rush to a conclusion based on a quick reading of the text of which we've probably skimmed 50% of it. And some of you have been brought up in a classical education context, which is a wonderful context to be educated, but it has trained you to read a lot and to read quickly. Okay, and if I have one goal, a personal goal, is to get you to read less and read slower, and to read far more closely. And actually observe what is being said. It's not an easy task. It's not an easy task. Process, imagination, we could talk in lots of ways, but one of the reasons we have recitations, one of the reasons why we sit round in smaller groups and discuss things, because the means of reaching a conclusion, if we go through that together as a small group and as we learn together as a small group, is a much more efficient, much more fruitful way of coming to a conclusion than me telling you the answer as a teacher. And imagination speaks for itself. So those are the intellectual skills we want to inculcate in you. Those are the things we want you to develop over the 4 years that you're here, or 2 years. But the 4 years, it's a 4-year plan, these skills. And we expect them to be sort of manifest most clearly and in a summative way in my theology class and in your senior thesis. Where all these things come together and you display these skills. And so as you think as your vocation of a student, as the faculty of NSA and as an institution, we go, here's a vocation for you. Take these skills, make them your own. And the thrilling thing about it for us is that when each of you do that, it's going to look quite different because you are all different. And then there are certain character traits which we want you to develop. Courage. And that's a character trait that is needed today. Whether it's standing up in front of your class each week in rhetoric, whether it's standing up in front of the whole school in upperclassmen declamations, or whether it's actually disagreeing with someone in your recitation, that'll take different levels of courage. We want you to develop that. We don't want to graduate students who sit there disagreeing or on the inside with everything that's going on about them and not having the courage to say, no, I think this. Or the courage to say, you know what, I think this, and I'm going to be willing to throw that out into the mix in this discussion, and I'm willing for everyone to turn around and say, no, that's not a great idea, that doesn't work. These are the reasons why it doesn't work, and then cut it down to size, and you go, that was really helpful. And I'm going to do it again next week. Toughness, initiative, these are all the character traits. Intellectual integrity, zeal, and evangelical loyalty. Those are all the traits that we're looking to develop and see develop in each of you. Now, remember, let me sort of start coming to a close. Remember our vision, our purpose. Graduate leaders who shape culture living faithfully under the Lordship of Jesus Christ. Your vocation as a student here under Christ is to commit yourselves to that education out of a love for God, and to see all these skills and traits develop in you and to grow in you and to be refined in you. Remember, I'm talking about an education here. And one thing we need to understand, and we need to understand really clearly as we think about education, is we need to distinguish education from qualification. Okay, the two are not the same. There are a lot of people with qualifications but very little education. There are a lot of people with very, very fine qualifications but very little education. And there's a whole world of people out there who are thoroughly educated and don't have a bit of paper to their name. So we can't equate the two. Now, New St. Andrews, you're going to get a piece of paper at the end of it, Lord willing, okay? In less than 4 years, or in less than 2 years, whichever degree program you're on, I will get up in front of a building and call your name out, and you'll come and shake the president's hand and get a piece of paper, a qualification. Okay, but that is only a part of the education that you have received. It is not the sum of the education you have received. So, you're to give yourselves to receiving an education here and to being educated, not simply to getting a qualification. And that's why we have all those other things that don't count for credit, that aren't on your required list of things to do in order to graduate from the college, but we think are vital for your education. And those are the things that, when life feels like it's getting too much, or that it's exam week's coming up, or paper deadlines are due, all those are the things that potentially are the ones that fall away. And your temptation will be to become narrower and narrower in your focus, in your education, and the narrowness will basically you'll start defining why you're being here is the qualification that you need to get. And that's a danger, and we don't want you to fall into that trap. Okay? There is more to life at NSA than the classroom. Okay? And the life outside of the classroom is valuable. So if you find yourself narrowing down, and just thinking in terms of the classroom and thinking in terms of that degree requirement, and honestly, I'm the dean of the college, I think that's important. But you're going to miss out on the broader aspects of your education, which we think are valuable for you in order to fulfill our mission as a college. You know, these aren't just asides. We don't think up these things just to think, how are we going to fill a little bit more of their time, give them a sort of a break, a little bit of breath so they can get back and do these other things. They're important. Being involved in your local church community and serving in that context, that's vital. We want you to do that. You know, NSA is not your church community. You have to remember that. We want you involved in that broader church community. Sport, service opportunities, social events, psalm sings, whatever they are, whatever it is, we think those are all part and parcel of what NSA has to offer. And it contributes to us fulfilling our mission and you fulfilling it. Of course, there's another danger there, which is the other side of the road, the ditch on the other side of the road, where you might find your faculty advisor calling you into the office and saying, it looks like you're struggling with this deadline here and this deadline in this class and this deadline in this class. How have you spent this week? Well, I was doing this good work and that great work, and I spent lots of time with my classmate who was really down, and I did this, and then you go, hold on a minute. Those are all good things. But they shouldn't be viewed in competition with things. There are obligations to you as being a student here, and those obligations need to be met. You can't neglect those. So there are two ditches on either side of the road. Don't fall into either of them. But the more common one for most people at NSA will be to narrow down to focus on just the degree requirements. So don't lose the broader vision. Don't leave NSA with a qualification but having ignored, in one sense, the weightier matters of your education. What sort of person have you become? Because if you do, then we have failed in our mission. And that's why the faculty will challenge you on it. They're not just going to challenge you on your sentence structure and your Latin vocabulary. They're not just going to challenge you on your correct understanding of a historical moment and your ability to communicate it. They're going to say, that attitude that you displayed in that recitation towards that comment someone else made, that wasn't good. What's going on there? You rolled your eyes when so-and-so said that. You did that last week as well. I just noticed that. What's going on? Those are the sort of challenges, because we have character traits that we set out as important. And we want to see you fulfill that. So the challenges will come in all sorts of places. So what do you need to remember? Let me sum up. Love of God and neighbor are the greatest commandments. Yeah. That is the beginning and the source and the reason for you having a vocation as a student here at NSA, and it is the end goal of all that education. You cannot shape culture or lead in a Christian context or be faithful under the lordship of Jesus Christ if that is not the beginning and the end of all that you do and think and say. To love God, love your neighbor. That's why theology is the beginning and the end of your education. You start freshman year theology, your last required class is theology. It's the beginning and the end. Okay? And in all of that theology, the goal is simple. And Dr. Harmon, sitting in the back, who's your freshman theology teacher, I'm standing at the front, your senior theology teacher. The sum of it all, love God, love your neighbor. Love him well. In all of it. And so the vocation, that calling, God is the one who has called you here. God is the one who has placed you here. He's brought you here from all a diverse group, diverse places, in diverse ways. But the command to all of you, and the obligation to all of you is this: love, he would say, love me. Love him in all that you do. And if you do that, then these skills and these traits are going to come in abundance, because you're going to give yourself to what you're given to do. You're going to give yourself to your obligations in the classroom. You're going to give yourself to your obligations to your classmate who's having a bad day or who's struggling in a particular area. You're going to be strong enough and courageous enough to go, what's going on? Why are you thinking like that? Why are you doing that? Why are you skipping this? You're going to give yourself to those things. And the fruit will be that fruitful tree planted by streams of water. Okay, that's the goal. That's the aim. In doing so, we will fulfill our mission. And as we do it, and the challenge to us as the faculty, as we present these things to you, is that's what we have to do as well. Our vocation as faculty is exactly the same. Love God in all that we do. What we're given to do is to give you lots of work to do. What you're given to do is to do that work. Now, it seems unfair. I admit, that may seem unfair to you at this moment in time. But it's actually not. It's not. It's good.